Thank you very much. Thank you. Now let's get to the crux of our conversation tonight. You know, Nigerians may be wondering whether the new year, 2025, will be a better year for them, as promised by the president, or the renewed hope promised by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. And on the other hand, the president has spoken twice in the last 1 month, saying he's ready to solve the myriad of problems facing the country. As an economist, how would
New Year, or let's leave the nuances and let's look at the facts, right? 31st is the day, 1st is the next day. But how have we fared in the last 1 year? And I think that's the most important element in the entire conversation, understanding how well we have fared and what the challenges are. The president has called the budget, the 2025 budget, the budget of restoration. And I think that if anything, government must start looking at building on, repairing, healing, sealing the wounds that 2024 has, inflicted on the people. Were they necessary somewhere? And I think that, I've said it on this platform more than once, that the issues were not predominantly the step that have been taken by government, but possibly in execution, in planning. A little bit of more thought could have been put to it. But I think it's time to start healing. And I'll just give a bit of an analogy. Yesterday, I had to buy fuel in a particular filling station for a different amount. And, today, in another vehicle, I had to buy fuel in another filling station for a different amount. And I got more value, where I got. And, and that, I think, had been the president's argument that, look, deregulate the sector, throw it open, let market forces determine the price, and let competition begin to drive home the price. And then you see, moving around, a lot of the filling stations are beginning to adjust their numbers to bring it down. And that really is the focus. But we don't have so much time to wait for all that to happen. We must begin to see these changes happen from top to bottom. Another key thing is the autonomy to local governments. But the major indices will be keeping them accountable and looking at the impact. Because I tell you, and
Will that be a challenge?
Well, it will be a challenge, because what has happened in the last 10 to 15 years is that the local government had been subjugated to be an appendage of the state government and literally was dead. Now, what the Supreme Court has done and what that judgment has done is to return life to the local government. And now the most important issue now will be to keep them accountable to ensure that that dividend of democracy trickles down. So there are a myriad of issues. And I think 2025 should be a year of healing, a year of picking the issues one after the other and addressing them decisively. You cannot wish away the fact that we remain largely dependent on crude oil. And I said this at the beginning of 2024, that I would like to see non-oil exports give oil exports a run for their money. I haven't seen that happen.
We'll come back to the oil and gas sector. But if we're to project into 2025 and with all of the indices on the ground, what do you think, what are the prospects for the year in various sectors of economy?
Well, I think that if you really look at it, what has happened has been kind of a conflagration in 2024. But everything appears to be settling down. We're beginning to adjust to the challenges of the deregulated petroleum markets. And then competition is beginning to drive demand and also influence the value. The place where it doesn't appear that we've gotten it right will be in our FX, the entire ecosystem around FX. CBN continues to appear to be playing, again, more like a game of chess, trying to find, where to really fit. But the key thing is, you see, when you allow certain things happen for so long, the major challenge is that it becomes a lot more difficult to curtail and manage. We are not exporting as much as we should to attract a lot. And while, the Dangote arrangement is fantastic, we're paying for crude in Naira and all that, that also greatly reduces the amount of crude that we export to attract FX. So the idea should now be that we should look at non-oil exports to begin to attract foreign direct investment. We've been having this conversation
for a while. What exactly is stopping us?
Well, I don't think that, I think the willpower, political will, and an altruistic commitment to see it, to a logical conclusion. Economics, and if there's anything we have seen in 2024, is that you cannot politicize economic development, because when you do, you end up getting burnt, right? You've got to look at it and give it the attention it deserves and the altruism that it deserves. The removal of subsidy remains one of the biggest gains of this government. Its implementation may have been problematic, but the fact that we have over $1 billion, 1.5 trillion naira in excess because subsidy had been removed means a lot. But then the next question is, where does that go to? I would advise that non-oil exports, agriculture, healthcare, technology and innovation must eat the chunk of that savings. Because you see, when you do that, what you are essentially doing is that you are equipping the other aspect of exports. You are building blocks for non-oil exports and attraction of foreign direct investment. For a long time, we have relied a lot on the dollar. Everything seems to find its bearing somewhere around the valuation of the dollar. It's not something we can wish away, and it's not something that we can, overnight with a magic wand change. But what we can do is to begin to attract more, bring more in, solidify our place around, the export of products and even services. And I continue to say that.
Talking about investments, I do apologize. What more do you think the federal government needs to do to attract investments into the country?
Create a more enabling environment. And I use the word more enabling environment. I'm excited that Dr. Edoigiawerie is now the Minister of Trade and Investment. She saw to the enactment of the Business Facilitation Act. PEBEC was in her table for close to 8 years. So there's nobody else who understands the need to drive this more than her. And that means looking at all the other ancillaries, right? While we may look at the big ticket items, there are other certain smaller key items that are very important to look at, right? Security remains a challenge, right? Logistics supply chain remains a challenge. Even the ease of dispute resolution is, one key thing that investors continue to ask, right? When I have challenges, how soon can I resolve commercial conflicts? As a lawyer, it remains one area that continues to be quite sore for us who are in the deep commercial space.
I thought we've done better. I thought we've moved up an inch compared to where we were coming from.
Of course. That's why I use the phrase more. We have definitely done better, right? But one thing that is very important is that we cannot afford to rest on our oars. We must continue to push even beyond where we are. We must continue to look at the challenges that we currently face, and we must continue to build on them. The ease of setting up a business in Nigeria is quite good, but then, for instance, in technology and innovation, there are a lot of innovative areas. There are a lot of emerging areas, emerging markets that still do not clearly have, a proper regulatory oversight and buffer. And that's partly because of very, very limited sectoral knowledge in these areas. So these are some of the things that have to be fixed to ensure that, we're bringing in, we're giving the right support for investors who want to come in, who believe that they will be heard and understood. The ease of exportation of capital. If there's anything the Cardoso-led CBN would beat its chest, it would be the fact that they have cleared all outstanding obligations to...
How impressive is that?
Well, that's impressive, right? That's the fact that they've cleared that, it's impressive. But the truth is, it shouldn't have even happened in the first place, right? If we had the right measures in place, if the right indices were clearly in place, we shouldn't have had that kind of backlog. And so, what they must do is to ensure that never again does such a thing happen. Anybody who's investing in your economy, and I say it, I said it here, and I'll say it again, Nigeria remains one of the best destinations to invest. right? We're a bundle of opportunities staring you in the face. Even the challenges that we constantly face are problems looking for solutions. And so we must now leverage on that strength, right? If you look at the data, and I try not to be too centered on the data, but if you look at the data, it tells you that as harsh as things appear to have been in 2024, we actually improved in certain places. FDI more came in, right? Compared to Q1, by the end of Q2 2024, we had done almost 100% of what came in 2023. So that tells you that there have been some improvement. But the issue is it trickling down? Is it creating the requisite ease? Right? So when you talk about hope, it must resonate with everyone, especially those at the lower end of the ladder.
Because I was going to go there. I mean, you see the president saying, please be patient with me. I'm still talking about some of these policies. Nigerians have shown that you're not so satisfied with some of these policies. Well, you see the World Bank applauding the president and saying, stay the course. Meanwhile, the president is saying, please be patient with me. But the question is, how soon?
So that's why I'm saying, that's what I said, that if you look at the data, I could come here and reel out data, right? A tube of yam comes down. Then they will begin to say, okay, this is actually working. And I will tell you, even for me, my first major interface with, okay, I'm actually seeing some bit of result happen today. Seeing that, okay, I'm able to buy more for less here, right? And these people are still selling at this price, but I'm seeing more queues here, and this place is empty. Two things it does for me. It tells me you can always get this product, but then if you want to get it cheaper, you can go here. But also this person is also seeing the need to...
Results of these kinds of policies are usually noticeable after 3 years.
We don't have the liberty of 3 years. I'm sure
that's what some economists said.
Yes. So I would even tell you 5.
5 years.
I would even tell you 5. In a sizable chunk of that number. Now, imagine if we get into the mix and really, really give that a run for our money, how much we'll be able to get in. But so many commitments are here and there. So even if we choose to invest massively into the sector to be able to bridge the gap of what we're producing to, shore up the demand, that will take time. But we must have certain fixes. And that's why I continue to say, for food and manufacturing, two key things are pivotal to this. Fix the transportation logistics supply chain. Because I'll tell you for a fact that apart from certain staple foods, the price of food has really not astronomically increased in rural areas. What continues to increase that cost is the logistics supply chain, moving it from that end to the major spots where people purchase these products, right? I do not see any reason why government cannot intentionally, and I use the word intentionally, invest in a rail line, primarily focused on connecting all the major food belts of the country. And so farmers are able to move in larger quantities food. Then investing in technology to ensure precision agriculture is key. Now, if you drive down the cost of food, it balances a lot. Because what happens is that people are able to buy, even able to eat first. Now, who chop first? Now they think of economy, right? So people are able to eat. People are able to, as Mr. President said, breathe. And then you can now look at the larger issues, which are the sustainability in the economy and all that. But where hunger remains a major indices, then you're talking about data continues to be, secondary.
Because you talked about intentions, the president also talked about the issue of living wage when he spoke to us on the 1st of January. It looks like he's more convinced or more particular about the vulnerable and the poor. What's your impression about that? Well, and for those who say living wage is relative, what exactly do they mean?
It still goes down to the standard of living and ensuring that people can access quality for less.
So what figure do you think would make the workers excited?
I think it's relative, right? But anything less than 100,000 is a no-brainer, right? Because the fact remains that when you look at the cost today, and you see the bag of rice balances a lot when it comes to determining what is living and what is not living, right? So if your monthly salary cannot buy you certain things, it becomes a problem, all right? But it would be quite hasty and presumptuous to reel out a figure, because what is a living wage in Lagos may not necessarily be a living wage in Benin, right. May not be a living wage in Kano, right? The major problem that we see today is that people who are at the lowest end of the ladder, who could feed for little or nothing, can no longer feed even with above little that they have. And so we must fix that quickly by ensuring that there's food security, right? And once you can assure food security, I think that part of the problem will reduce. And then we can look at the big ticket items, right? The next thing is if we're able to attract substantial foreign direct investments, two things will happen. The dollar will be under pressure to come down, because there's more of it than you have. You have more of it, so you'll be able to balance that cost. To have the dollar going over 1,000, 1,500, 1,600, 1,700, these things are, remember, Nigeria is predominantly a consumption-based economy. We're not producing a lot because we have issues with power. We have issues to access to finance. CBN will meet again. MPC rates will go up again. That becomes a challenge for
Omoruyi, let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll talk about the tax reform bills, which are still generating a lot of controversy, and the 2025 budget. Please stay with us, everyone.
Stories. They swore an oath to serve our fatherland and defend the people. They traded their freedom, comfortable homes, and mortgaged their lives on the battleground for our unity and peaceful living. These are the great, loyal, and committed Nigerian armed forces who risked their lives courageously to safeguard our borders. But in the line of duty, many never returned. Nigerians, arise, let's celebrate our fallen heroes. Put on the remembrance emblem to support the incapacitated and families of our fallen heroes.
Thank you for your patriotic commitment to Nigerian unity, stability, and progress.
Parastatals, religious and corporate bodies to donate generously to the Emblem Appeal launch. Send your donations to these accounts.
Any students, but any teacher.
Can't continue like this.
Their voices re-echoing through time itself.
We haven't done anything. If the tide is high, everybody run for safety.
Their tears leave a sweet, sour taste for all their demands. A familiar call beckoning for change. In our world, no one expects a disaster to happen. But when it does, we'll be there to x-ray all sides, from the east to the west, north and south. Committee Forum will examine the oddities and challenges to economic development, as well as issues yearning for government intervention. Watch fresh episodes of Committee Forum on Sundays by 9:30 p.m. only on TVC News.
Welcome back to Politics Tonight, everyone. Thank you very much for staying with us. Tonight, our attention is focused on Nigeria's economic outlook and the projections for 2025. And our guest tonight is Omoruyi Edoigiawerie, an economist, a business startup lawyer. Thank you so much for staying with us on the program. Now, let's quickly talk about investments in oil and gas, which many experts say have begun to, produce positive results. And they look at the Port Harcourt refinery and the reopening of the Warri refinery. Any positive impact in the economy yet?
So I have a contrary opinion to these refineries, and I believe that government has no business running refineries.
I mean, I've heard that many times.
If you understand how the public sector works and public service works, public service is better enabled from a regulatory and support perspective, and not from a business or value creation perspective, right? It's better they just provide that enabling environment and regulate to ensure complying, for want of better language, right? And so it's nothing to celebrate, nothing to clap about. I think that they should let the private sector under very strict and firm regulations, deal with this, right? And so we can have sustainable improvement. You do not want, when they first announced the opening of the refinery, there was a lot of celebration, and suddenly we heard some news and all that. And you keep hearing things like this. It discourages you, and that's because sometimes government has no business doing these things. Government's predominant role is to create an enabling environment to enable businesses thrive, and then regulate those businesses to ensure adherence with laws. And I think that we must, especially in the petroleum industry, that should be the focus, right? Because if you look at the successes of the Dangote refinery, for instance, you would find that because it's private sector driven, there is a level of internal accountability and a drive for profitability, right? In public sector, it's not always like that, right? And the petroleum, the energy lawyers have not won, but with the PIA and its enactment and the implications of that, I would have thought that that should be deregulated. But then government needs to invest more in creating that enabling environment for the petroleum industry to thrive.
But we have 2 refineries up and running, active at the moment. Isn't that some level of progress for government?
When it's progress. How sustainable, time will tell. And I think that's and it's good. You see, the danger also, and I think that one thing, and this is just Omoruyi speaking, but I think that one thing that may have spurred, that action would be, look, you don't want to give one private sector entity the monopoly over such a very serious market. It is reasonable and very important, right? But then encourage more private sector players to come into the game, right? Encourage more private sector players to invest heavily, protect their investments, create the enabling environment, and let them get into the market, and everybody puts their head in and let the best man,
So when the president said he had met his financial obligations without resorting or going back to the NNPCL for funding, what does that mean to you?
It means that he has been, more prudent.
Okay.
He's looking at other alternative sources of funding, which, with the president's track record and background, should not be surprising. Because there's a typical adage that says continuing the same thing and expecting a different result is a definition of insanity. The president had got to look outside the box, think outside the box, to look for alternative means of running this government or building the economy. Because NNPC at itself, if we want to talk about NNPC, we'll be here for 2 hours, 3 hours, and we will not even scratch the surface. They have their own challenges, right? So continuing to look that way would have definitely been a problem. But don't forget, he cut out a major problem, subsidy. And that puts a lot more money in his pockets. And it is that is reflecting in a lot more things.
All right. Tax reform bills, what exactly do you think is the crux of the matter?
I think that before all this started, one of the things that Taiwo Oyedele had always said is that we have too many tax laws. Okay. And there should be a proper harmonization of our tax laws, right, in order to ensure that. So what we have suffered before now, and many businesses will tell you, is that there have been a proliferation of taxes. Because you have 3 levels of government, the likelihood of double taxation is quite high. So the need to harmonize is there. There are the issues around VAT, state governments, constitutional issues, but I think that the central objective of the tax reform bill is commendable, right? To harmonize our tax system and to really tax those who should be taxed and give some relief to those who should be relieved. And in fact, if there is anything that I believe, is giving a bit of credence to let the poor breathe, it will be the tax reform bill. Because if properly, put in place, one thing it will do is that it will look at your income, right? So for instance, personal income tax, what it has done is to stratify those who will be taxed and those who wouldn't.
I think the NLC does not understand, or the NLC president, because there are those who have said he may not be speaking on behalf of the entire union. What do you think the NLC does not understand? NLC president does not understand about this bill? Because Ajo is saying throughout this bill.
So I think that communication is very essential. And the committee, the Presidential Committee on Tax, and I know that
if communication is an issue, you understand these views. If communication was an issue, you wouldn't understand it.
So, no. So when I say this, I'm an expert, right? And this is my field. I would understand it more than you will. But it's also important to break some of these things down and consult. Oftentimes, the challenge many stakeholders have with implementing new policies or enacting new laws comes from a place of feeling left out of the conversation. And so that consultation, we're in a democracy, so it's important to ensure that there is a holistic, approach to decision making, getting people to buy in. NLC plays a pivotal role in
I do apologize because in the last 6 hours or 10 hours thereabouts, Professor Edoigiawerie had said the governors were not ready to communicate. They were not ready to come to a round table for dialogue and further consultation on this issue.
Yeah, but you know that the governors have a very strong, they've gone to court before over VAT. The governors believe that the federal government has no business around VAT, right? And also, if you look at the harmonization, it's creating a balance between who gets what and being equitable, based on the amount of revenue you're generating. So what will happen is that a governor who is up and doing, right, and a state that is driving its IGR will be excited. One that believes, it does not have the capacity to drive IGR knows that it will be starved of additional income, because now it's not just about cutting the cake, equally and giving everyone. It's about you earning what you are getting. And really, that's how it should be. So you should get people to sit on their toes and do things. But they'll tell you there's an imbalance of, economic factors. There's imbalance, there are challenges, security situation, different things that, create that imbalance. And everywhere is not Lagos, in quote, right? But I think the governor should look inward, right? I think they should look at certain things. I try not to politicize these issues. I'm not a politician, right? But oftentimes, some of this resistance comes from not the technical nature of the issue, but the politics of it.
Because some say it's very ridiculous to hear these governors say some states would not survive if these bills are passed.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah. But again, let's see what happens in the next few days. And also, Nigerians are saying the struggling or underperforming states should consider merging their resources, work together to identify strategies. What's the perspective on this? Ish?
Well, I think that...
And I do apologize, when President Bola Tinubu says he's open to negotiations on VAT, what should he be negotiating on?
I can't speak for the president. Okay. And I don't know why he's open to negotiations. I think it's a fantastic, the plan. I'm really, listen, okay, we've gone beyond a lot of these highfalutin plans. Implementation has always been our problem. Execution, intentional, proper execution. So really, we can plan all we like, but will the execution give us a desired effect, right? If the president is looking at discussing with the governors, yes, because you see, the president is a politician who understands that when there's a political issue, you've got to resolve it. Because if you don't resolve the political issue, the non-political issues will suffer. So he knows that he has to resolve that issue. It's on his table, and I wish him best of luck in resolving that issue. But then, governors must begin to think outside the box. You see, the issue is, this federalism, and this cutting of cake and sharing, has made certain states lazy. And so many of them are not even...
I say increased FAC allocation would make them lazy.
Many of them are not even looking inward, right? There are so many opportunities. And I would say, for instance, Lagos, Ogun State. Let's just look at this. Lagos is battling a population challenge. Lagos is full, in quote. I was just with friends. I said, Lagos is not full. Everybody should go and look for another house. But then, if the governor of the adjoining state, Ogun State, is looking at profiting of the population explosion in Lagos, the most impactful investment would be getting a waiver from federal government and building a rail line from Obalende or from Oshodi all the way to Abeokuta. Do you know how many people will move out of Lagos? That's New York and New Jersey. The level of investment in Abeokuta would triple. There's so much land. And even by road, it's barely an hour. But what's happening? We're waiting for FAC. And there's so many states like that. All we need to do is to look beyond our immediate environment and look inward. Think out of the box. You know, when you know that, listen, I'm going to get what I earn. Today in my team meeting, we're looking at, okay, are we going to have some packed days of virtual work? And one member of my team said, look, let us earn it. And so if we earn it, we get it. And I think that if governors are pushed to earn what they get. But you see, the thing about politics is that politics comes down to winning an election.
So I wanted to say, who does that?
Politics comes down to winning an election. And for every politician, every decision has the next election cycle at the back of the scheme of things. And so the president is very conscious of that. And even in trying to push these economic reforms, you have to ensure that the governors are happy, because the elections will come and they will wield the power that they supposedly have.
Let's talk about the 2025 budget with a deficit of 13 trillion naira, which would be financed through borrowing. I mean, we're pegged to be spending more than we generate and borrowing more. How concerned are you?
What are we generating? Manufacturing is at its lowest ebb because access to finance is a problem. Man, as at Q3 2024, we're crying out. We can't borrow anymore. It's too expensive to borrow. CBN continues to increase rates. So it's really difficult, right? Every time you're expecting the next basis point inclusions and all that. But CBN has a reason for that, right? You're trying to curb inflation. If that is working, different conversation for another day.
Oh, we'll have it tonight.
But then, until you decide, right? Until you decide to build, the indices for us to export non-oil, because a lot of our oil has been mortgaged, right? So until you now start looking at non-oil exports and boosting that supply, we will continue to have that funding deficit. And the only way you can bridge the gap is to borrow. But then we need to, I have even said, look, I will say it again, pick a product, support it, commodify it, and invest largely in it, boost it for exports. Crude oil must, you see, if we want to come out of that borrowing phase, if we want to attract FDI, and if we want a stable economy, at least in the next 3 to 5 years, we must produce one or two key things that will be predominantly exported by Nigeria to the world. And until we have that kind of export, we'll continue to, cherry pick the issues. We can't rely on crude oil forever. And even the crude oil, we're not top level suppliers of that demand. But we have cassava. Cassava, the byproduct of cassava is ethanol. Ethanol is now what is being used in most developed countries where they do not want fossil fuels, right? So why don't we commodify cassava? We have rubber, we have cocoa, we have other mineral deposits. And the solid mineral deposits in this country is also where we need to begin to look at, right? There have been a couple of discussions around it, but many states that are waiting for FAC have a lot of mineral deposits that they could now discuss, even though those fall within the power of the federal government, but they could now see how that benefits them. We must start looking at those issues. Until we do, we will continue to borrow to balance, borrow to
But how do we manage our debt level? And I'm asking because Minister Waliadu some weeks ago called for necessary steps to manage ballooning debts and its servicing on the African continent. But back here in Nigeria, our public debt has been a major cause or point of concern for many Nigerians.
Auditing. Government must audit the cost of governance. That's where it starts. You must, how much is it costing me to run my government? And when we start there...
So the president still has a lot to do in that.
Oh, yes. And see, let's cut the president some slack, right? There are governors. There are local government chairmen. These people are incurring costs. We must audit from top to bottom. And you see, when you audit, you cut your belt, right? And then so if we look at the budget, go through an analysis done by budget, you will find that there are so many things that are not essential and integral to us coming out of the present challenges that we have. Those things should, you see, we're in a situation where there should be more like, an emergency approach to solving certain things, which means that, slashing a lot of these things. And I know that the president, had slashed a number of entourage, slashed different things. But you see, the bureaucracy of public service, is expensive. And we must look at that. Two, a lot of the projects that are not going to help us come out of the present challenges we have today should be suspended until we come out of them. Agriculture, education that involves enabling technology to help improve agriculture. Key sectors like healthcare should be invested heavily in order to ensure that, listen, we're not in normal times, so to speak. This budget is, I think Mr. President called it budget of restoration, right? The only way you can restore is, in simple terms, take people back to where they were before, right? When they were not complaining. Okay. And so it's important that we look at that. Where were we before? What was the cost of food, right? What was the cost of living, and all that. And, when people talk about power tariffs and all that, those costs are high. But also when you look at the cost of alternative energy, which you're having to save and balance those costs, you find that we are now having to, cut our quotes according to our size. You switch off your lights, you switch off your freezers, you reduce your consumption cost so that you balance that, right? And if the private person is doing this, government must also do this in one shape.
So let's talk about reviving Nigeria's economy through the lens of the CBN. In November, for instance, CBN raised the country's interest rate by 25 basis points to 27.50% in November. What does that mean for Nigeria's economy?
Well, they've been raising now. When we started, it was 17 or so. That's 17 or 18, and we're at 27 now. 27.25. Right? And I think that CBN needs to think outside the box. I think I've said that too many times in this interview, but they need to now begin to look at another way to curb this inflation, because definitely this is not working, right? Because while you're trying to curb inflation, what is happening is that you're stifling indigenous manufacturing, you're stifling indigenous growth, you're stifling indigenous development. And there's no way we can attract FX. If we don't attract FX, we will continue to have inflation. So everyone has been talking about dirty December. We're in January, and we're talking of dirty December. We're talking of IJGBs, people who came in. I saw a tweet from my friend who said, oh, you're sitting at the restaurant or in the club, and they say, oh, this is 500,000. And IJGB says, oh, how much is that in dollars? Okay. Now, what this tells you is that FX is coming in, and they're changing for a lot more naira. And so they're having a lot more naira in their hands. Are you really curbing inflation?
Sadly, we cannot continue, or we cannot cover the entirety of this conversation tonight, so we'll have it some other time. Thank you so much for joining us on Politics Tonight. Omoruyi, Edoigiawerie, an economist and a business startup lawyer. Thank you so much for your perspectives on the program.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you very much for watching, everyone. That marks the end of today's episode of Politics Tonight. But you can watch the repeat broadcast of this episode at midnight. Get in touch with us on our social media handles, Facebook, Instagram, and X, at TVC News NG and at Olajumoke using the hashtag PoliticsTonight. We're also on YouTube at youtube.com/TVC News Nigeria. I am Olajumoke Olatunji. Good night, everyone.